Good evening. Today is July 28th, and this is Kingdom News. My name is Siobhan Singh, and here are the headlines for today. Authorities in China return to demolish Christian homes after razing church. Church gives away hundreds of backpacks of school supplies for needy families. And Israeli scientists identify drug they hope can downgrade COVID-19 to a common cold level. Now for the news in details. A month after partially demolishing a church structure in China's Fujian province, dozens of security guards and officials came back to bulldoze homes in the residential compound where the church once stood. Guards and officials from the local ethnic and religious bureau stormed the Jingguang church building in Xiamen city last Wednesday for further demolition of Christian homes in conjunction to the house church, reports the U.S.-based persecution watchdog International Christian Concern. A Christian preacher, Yang Zibo from Zunziding Church, posted videos on Facebook in which dozens of officials from the urban management law enforcement departments can be seen marching toward the remaining structures that were not demolished in June. While breaking into a Christian home, the officials didn't show any papers of authorization for their actions. When a 67-year-old woman tried to stop them, officials, some of them equipped with anti-riot shields, shuffled her off. Authorities also removed church property, including furniture and educational materials, from the church's school section. The timing of the destruction coincided with the State Department's annual report on international religious freedom, including a lengthy section on freedom of religion or belief violations by the Chinese government. On Open Doors USA's World Watch list, China is ranked as one of the worst countries in the world when it comes to the persecution of Christians. The organization notes that all churches are perceived as a threat if they become too large, too political, or invite foreign guests. Some 25% of Americans believe that there is at least some truth to the conspiracy theory that powerful people intentionally planned the new coronavirus outbreak, and conservative Republicans, Blacks, and Hispanics are more likely to fall into this group, according to results of a survey recently released by the Pew Research Center. The results of the survey conducted in June were highlighted by the Pew Research Center just a day before Sinclair Broadcast Group announced it would delay airing a controversial episode of its program, America This Week, suggesting Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, had a hand in the development of COVID-19. He's the head of NIAID, and he didn't discover this particular coronavirus, but they had been working on isolating coronaviruses from bats since the mid to late 90s, and they had shipped originally funded the studies to Wuhan, China. When it was illegal in this country to do these types of studies further, McCovitz told Bowling. According to the Pew survey, 71% of Americans say they have heard of the pandemic conspiracy, but just 20% says it is probably true, and 5% believe it is definitely true. A congregation in Illinois has given away hundreds of backpacks full of school supplies to students for the upcoming school year, with the hopeful expectation of giving away more later. White Ash Free Will Baptist Church of Marion handed out over 300 backpacks loaded with supplies on Saturday, with around 200 more backpacks likely to be given out at later dates. Stephanie Lee, wife of White Ash senior pastor Andy Lee, told the Christian Post that this was their fourth year of holding such a charity drive for their community. Lee says that we know that how this school year will look is still a bit uncertain, but students will still need supplies, whether they are in the classroom or remote learning from home. Unlike past years, the COVID-19 pandemic altered some of their plans. Lee noted with the event being held outdoors instead of indoors, and there being no free lunch or haircuts. She continues, we have received more requests from people who weren't able to come to the event, and we are coordinating to be able to fulfill those requests. Describing the event of more of a drive-through gathering, Lee noted that the church had a team of volunteers who went about awaiting cars, sharing the gospel with families. She says, our greatest desire is for people to come to know Jesus and the hope he gives. We also want them to know that White Ash Free Will Baptist Church cares about our community, and we strive to show the love of Christ in everything we do. The United States Supreme Court declined on Friday evening to grant a Nevada church's request to block state restrictions on gatherings it claimed gave preferential treatment to secular entities like casinos. At issue was Governor Steve Sisolak's state restrictions that limited gatherings at houses of worship to 50 people while allowing secular entities like casino to operate at 50% capacity. In a 5-4 decision, with Chief Justice John Roberts joining the more liberal justices, the High Court effectively allowed a lower court decision upholding the state restrictions to stand. In June, the District Court Judge Richard Boulware II ruled against the church, arguing in part that the church failed to prove that it was being discriminated against. He says it is difficult to establish a pattern of selective enforcement directed toward places of worship when new, more restrictive measures have been imposed against secular activities and no similar restrictions were imposed on religious activity. Republican Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin is among several voices calling for justice after Brunel Trammell, a Black Milwaukee business owner, was shot dead last Thursday, just hours after he urged Black Americans to vote for President Donald Trump. Brunel Trammell was known to many in Milwaukee. My condolences to his family and friends. I hope they get answers and justice soon, Johnson tweeted late Friday. Trammell, 60, who ran Expressions Journal, a small publication where he also made large signs with political and religious messages, such as Vote Donald Trump 2020, was well known in Milwaukee's River West neighborhood. Affectionately known as Ras, Milwaukee police say he was shot dead outside his store at 12:30 p.m. on Thursday. This was just hours after he gave an interview to blogger Armstrong Ransom, which was published on thegoddecree.com, explaining why Black Americans should support the re-election of President Donald Trump because he is the sign of the times. It is tragic to learn of the senseless murder of Brunel Trammell, and I offer my sincere condolences to his family and friends, Chairman Andrew Hitt said. He continued, because of Trammell's well-known political activism and the possibility that his murder could be politically motivated, I respectfully request the United States Attorney Matthew Kruger open an investigation into this heinous crime. No American should fear for their personal safety because of where they live or their political affiliation. In the battle against COVID-19, volunteers have rolled up their sleeves to take part in the biggest test yet of an experimental vaccine. Moderna is now beginning its third and final phase of testing. Pfizer is close behind, and there is hope that by the end of the year there will be 2 or 3 coronavirus vaccines ready for use. This is enormous, says Dr. Frank Eder of Meridian Clinical Research. He says we have been sitting on the sidelines passively attempting to wear masks and social distance and not go out when it's not necessary. This is the first step of becoming active against this. Roughly 30,000 Americans are expected to participate in both the Moderna and Pfizer trials. For now, an attempt at any return to normalcy is quite difficult to achieve. Just 72 hours after the shortened Major League Baseball season started, a pair of games scheduled for Monday night were postponed after more than a dozen members of the Miami Marlins baseball team and staff tested positive. And across the country, citizens and businesses owners continue to be arrested for defying state-ordered lockdowns and mask laws, like gym owners in Florida. There's a new urgency to stop the spread of coronavirus, with 30 million Americans set to lose their coronavirus unemployment benefits. The temporary $600 weekly check expires this week. Israeli medical professionals are struggling to cope with the second wave of the coronavirus outbreak, as some hospitals are at more than 100% capacity. 4 Israeli hospitals have reported that they are operating at capacity or are already overcrowded. According to Israel's health ministry, Hadassah University Medical Center in Jerusalem's Ayin Karim is the most crowded hospital. The center is reportedly at 164% capacity in its coronavirus ward and 113% occupancy overall. The health ministry reported on Tuesday that the country saw 2,001 new cases on Monday alone. There are 321 people in serious condition, and most of them are on ventilators. So far, 480 people have died. The ministry is trying to help overcrowded hospitals by implementing an early release of patients suffering from mild symptoms and transferring elderly patients to the geriatric centers for treatment. The ongoing health crisis has resulted in nearly daily protests against the government in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. The unemployment rate in the country is still above 20%. The Knesset Christian Allies Caucus will celebrate its official relaunch for the 23rd Knesset on Tuesday, July 28th at the Friends of Zion Ambassador Institute in Jerusalem. Established in 2004, the KCAC works to be the link between pro-Israel Christian leaders and members of Israel's Knesset or parliament. The relaunch event will stream on the Jerusalem Prayer Team Facebook page at 6 p.m. Israel time. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Friends of Zion International Chairman Dr. Mike Evans, Speaker of the Knesset Yariv Levin, and U.S. Ambassador David Friedman and KCAC Director Josh Reinstein will give speeches. Knesset Christian Allies Caucus member MK Sharon Haskell will give the keynote address discussing the importance of streamlining communication between Israel's leaders and Christian organizations around the world. Member of Israel's Knesset and parliamentary leaders from Guatemala to Nigeria will all speak about their work in strengthening Christians' connection to Israel. California Pastor John MacArthur said in a sermon Sunday his church will continue to meet in person despite a state-mandated ban on such gatherings, saying that Christ, not the state, is the head of the church. He says, "I can't think of anything worse than to put an entire world into fear and then shut down the only place that they could go to have their fear finally and completely removed," said MacArthur, a well-known author and preacher at Grace Community Church in Sun Valley, California, whose sermons are syndicated on radio stations nationwide. He continued, "We are fulfilling our Lord's design." Churches in at least 30 counties have been ordered by the state to close again due to rising COVID-19 cases. MacArthur's sermon came 3 days after the elders of Grace Community Church released a public statement saying the congregation will not bow to the state restrictions because the state itself had exceeded its authority. MacArthur, in its sermon, said Grace Community closed during the initial stages of the pandemic as a voluntary measure to protect its members. "We were told millions were going to die. It was just sensible and rational to be protective. As time went on, however, we found out the virus was not as deadly as predicted," he said, "and the commands not to assemble didn't apply to protesters and riots." He continued, "I am sympathetic with Grace Community's concern about the indefinite elongation of this time," Lehman added. "Still, if the state does not have the authority to tell church leaders, if you try to bind the consciences of church members by telling them they should attend a gathering that could physically harm them, we will intervene. Then we should be patient even as that time extends for a while. Christians have endured the inconveniences of persecution and pandemics for years, even decades before." Twitter is refusing to promote an article by Christian author Larry Alex Taunton in which he attempts to provide a Christian response to the civil unrest across the United States and argues that the violent riots are planned Marxist political tools. Taunton, a 53-year-old freelance writer and executive director of the Fixed Point Foundation, wrote an essay earlier this month called "Understanding What is Happening in America, a Christian Response." He tried to promote the article, which argues that the riots are an elaborate plan by Marxists for political power through the social media platform. Promotion on Twitter expands a tweet audience, acting as an advertisement for the content. But in a tweet Sunday afternoon, Taunton said that his request to promote the article was rejected. He told the Christian Post in an interview Monday that he received a response from Twitter 2 days ago after initiating the promotion, saying his promotion has been stopped because it did not comply with Twitter's ad policy. However, Taunton said that he believed his essay provided an opinion and clarification on a nationwide issue. The denied promotion is the first time Taunton has had an issue with Twitter censorship. He said he was surprised it happened to his work. He says, I was intrigued. All of this vile content is being promoted, but I can't promote this. It doesn't matter if Twitter disagrees with my opinion, but nothing I said in this article is anything other than providing an opinion. With help of several Twitter users who agree with Taunton, including longtime friend Eric Metaxas, the article has received 200,000 views despite the lack of promotion, according to Taunton. Lawmakers in Washington are wrestling this week with the best ways to help unemployed Americans and struggling businesses hit hard by the pandemic lockdowns. Most economists believe Congress must provide continued extra aid to keep a lifeline afloat for tens of millions of unemployed people and struggling small companies that may not be able to stay in business. New legislation on an aid package could give a faltering economy a desperately needed boost. But many are skeptical of the ability of lawmakers to forge a consensus in the midst of election year politics. On Monday, Republicans released their $1 trillion stimulus plan. The main sticking point appears to be a federal unemployment benefit that so far has provided the unemployed with an extra $600 a week on top of state unemployment checks. And in some cases, this incentivized people from working. In Virginia, restaurant owner Sean Dawkins says the generous unemployment has gotten in the way of hiring back former employees. A few weeks ago, as numbers in his area began to improve, he considered reopening his Cutlass Grill dining room and reached out to former workers. He wasn't successful. Some of them actually made the comment, make sure I'm the last one you reach out to, because they are still collecting unemployment. So that's the challenge itself, said Dawkins, who says his fellow restaurant owners in the community are struggling with the same issue. A University of Chicago study found that federal and state unemployment benefits during the pandemic have helped more than 2/3 of out-of-work Americans receive more in jobless payments than their former earnings. U.S. Attorney General William Barr is appearing before the House Judiciary Committee today to confront those who have tried to undermine his credibility. He's expected to heavily criticize what he calls the bogus Russiagate scandal and the politicians who have come after him as a result of his attempts to discover the truth behind the matter. Barr argues many Democrats are trying to discredit him, saying they think he's simply doing the president's bidding. He says he's only pursuing justice. Ever since I made it clear that I was going to do everything I could to get to the bottom of the grave abuses involved in the bogus Russiagate scandal, many of the Democrats on this committee have attempted to discredit me by conjuring up a narrative that I'm simply the president's factotum who disposes of criminal cases according to his instructions. Barr is expected to say, according to prepared remarks released to the press. Barr will also defend the federal law enforcement in response to the violence in some major cities, saying violent rioters and anarchists have hijacked legitimate protests sparked by the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police. 2 months after the killing of George Floyd, an unarmed black man who died in police custody in Minnesota, thousands of people across the country continue to march in support of Black Lives Matter and against police brutality. Early this morning, hundreds of demonstrators continued to stage protests outside the federal courthouse in Portland, Oregon. Police have been deploying tear gas and flashbangs to keep protesters off federal property as a violent confrontation between activists and law enforcement entered its 8th week. In one park not far from the protests, they discovered a bag full of loaded rifle magazines and Molotov cocktails. Jay, a protester in Portland, argued the goal is to have us actually get somewhere with all of these protests. People are trying to go for systemic change. Earlier Sunday, thousands took to the streets of Portland and more than a half a dozen other cities around the country. The protests are often turning from peaceful to chaotic, even fatal. Israeli tanks patrolled the Golan Heights on Tuesday near the site of fighting as a tense calm returned to Israel's northern border. Explosions and gunfire erupted along Israel's northern border with Lebanon Monday afternoon amid reports that the Iranian-backed Hezbollah terror group was executing an attack against the Jewish state. The Israel Defense Forces told residents near the border to stay in their homes and roads have been closed. Israel's Channel 12 reports that Hezbollah terror cell tried crossing the border and firing anti-tank missiles at Israeli soldiers. Israeli media reports that Israeli troops responded and Lebanese gunmen have been killed. There are no reports of casualties among the IDF soldiers. Just minutes before the incident, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned Lebanon and Hezbollah that they will bear the responsibility for any attack against us emanating from the Lebanese territory, he stated. The IDF is prepared for any scenario, he added. Defense Minister and alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz issued a similar warning to the Hezbollah terror group on Sunday during a visit with the military leaders to the Israeli-Lebanese border. A street preacher in Seattle exercising his First Amendment right to free speech was harassed and threatened by protesters, presumably an Antifa, wearing gas masks and other riot gear. The video taken by CBN contributor Chuck Holton shows the unnamed street preacher attempting to relay Bible passages and a message about Christ. He's wearing a t-shirt that says, "Trust Yeshua, Jesus," on the back. It's for you to be born again. If you want the world to be a better place, start with yourself. Give your life to Jesus, the preacher says. At that moment, two masked members of Antifa walked directly in front of him, yelling, "You're not with us, go and talk to them," and pointing in the other direction. "You keep following me one more time and I will mess you up. Don't follow us," another protester threatened while assuming an aggressive posture. As the preacher continued to try and share the good news, yet another masked protester repeatedly blocked his path and yelled in his face, "Go away," over and over again. "We do not want to hear this." This went on until Holton interjected and asked the protester a question. Here's a recap of today's news. Authorities in China returned to demolish Christian homes after razing church. Church gives away hundreds of backpacks of school supplies for needy families. And Israeli scientists identify a drug they hope can downgrade COVID-19 to a common cold level. Today's news was reported by CBN, The Christian Post, Christian Headlines, and Charisma News. My name is Siobhan Singh, and this is Kingdom News. Until next time, do have a good evening.